The first war that I became aware of, complete with its heroes and strategies, was one that never took place on Earth, but in a galaxy far, far away. I was 9 years old. My cousins and I stood in a line that stretched for hundreds of feet outside the theater so that we could be among the first to see Star Wars, which was released May 25th, 1977. Now, 49 years later, I'm not rushing to see the new Star Wars movie, The Mandalorian and Grogu, though I'm sure I'll see it in time with my son. But it sure is tempting to look away at what this weekend is calling us to look at and just go see a movie about another galaxy. Now, my favorite Star Wars movie came out at the end of 2016. It was a prequel to the very first Star Wars movie, Rogue One. And the story behind it was that line in that first movie that was more or less, many lives were lost to obtain these plans on how to destroy the Death Star. And with the most diverse cast of characters who come together in any Star Wars film, they get the plans of the Death Star into the hands of Princess Leia. And the movie ends with all the heroes in this city and the two core heroes embracing as a giant fireball erupts and the city is annihilated. It wasn't clear to my son, who was 9 years old at the time, what had happened. And he asked, and I said, they succeeded. And everyone on the planet, they died. Everyone on the planet, all the heroes, they died? Yes. And I realized that was the first war my son came to be aware of. And given that our nation is currently at war, thanks to an ill-conceived plan, this Memorial Day is really challenging. This weekend is challenging for me. I wish the history of Memorial Day was more widely known, because Memorial Day is a day for remembering. Remembering those who have lost their lives in the service of our nation, and to do so meaningfully. Remembering the lessons learned from wars both past and present, for how better to honor our young dead soldiers, especially in our culture that systematically forgets the past. Now, the history of Memorial Day goes back to communities in the South following the Civil War and their custom of decorating the graves of those who died in combat. In Columbus, Mississippi, the town cemetery contained the graves of soldiers from both the South and the North, and the women of the town decided to decorate all the graves, not just those from their side. It was a gesture of reconciliation, to make no distinction between the political loyalties of the dead. Now, other towns followed suit. And soon the practice spread throughout the country, and Memorial Day was made a national holiday in 1868. Those Southern women who chose to honor all of the Civil War dead did so simply because their lives were cut short by a willingness to put their lives on the line for something greater than themselves. And these women's, their act of reconciliation was blind to who was a winner and who was a loser, right or wrong. But instead, they demonstrated an essential realization. If peace is to prevail, there comes a time when we all must move on together. Memorial Day weekend is a time to remember aspects of war that true patriots will not forget. For the experiences of many soldiers impact their lives forever, sometimes incapacitating them, leaving deep scars on their psyches. Unitarian theologian Rebecca Ann Parker, in her book Proverbs of Ashes, Violence, Redemptive Suffering, and the Search for What Saves Us, writes about a pastoral visit she made to the home of one of her parishioners, Maxine. Maxine tells Rebecca the story of her brother Lyle Gruntmeyer, and when he returned from combat in from World War II. And this is Parker's retelling of what Maxine told her. In 1945, Lyle came home from the war, the only veteran to return alive to the small town in Iowa he'd left to go to the Western Front. The day he arrived home, the whole town came out to meet him. When the train pulled into the station, the band played. Family and friends waved and cheered, and the mayor stood ready to greet him. But the man who climbed off the train was not the cheerful, high-spirited boy who had gone off to war. The man who climbed off the train was a ghost. In response to the music and cheers, he stared back mutely. His blank face did not register recognition of anyone, not his mother, sister, or friends. They took Lyle home to the farm. He sat in the rocker in the parlor. He wouldn't speak. He wouldn't sleep. And he would barely eat. No one in that town knew what was wrong. They just knew that Lyle's soul was lost somewhere. Maxine decided to keep her brother company. She'd sit in the parlor with him and talk. She'd tell them the news from the hardware store in town or about the potluck at church, who was there, which dress each young woman wore. She'd tell them how the clean laundry had blown off the line and into the tomatoes that morning. And when she ran out of things to say, she'd just sit with him quietly, snapping beans or mending socks. Lyle was like a stone, no expression on his face, rocking. It went on like this for days that flowed into weeks and into months. Then one night, late, after everyone else had gone to bed, Maxine was sitting with Lyle, quietly knitting, when the eyes of Lyle's still face filled with tears. The tears spilled over and began to run down his face, and Maxine noticed. She got up and put her arms around her brother, held in his sister's embrace. Lyle began to cry full force. Great gusts of sobbing, and Maxine held him. Then he began to talk. He talked about the noise, the cold, the smoke, the death of his buddies, and then he spoke of the camps, the mass graves, the smell. He talked all night, and Maxine listened. And when the morning light came across the fields, she went to the kitchen and cooked him breakfast. He ate, and then he got up out of that rocking chair and went out to do the morning chores. So seems so surreal that our country is at war. There certainly is a great push by the administration not to allow the deaths of anyone, whether American or Iraqi, to be shared. And I can't help but remember of 23 years ago, when UU congregations across the country voted overwhelmingly to oppose the American invasion of Iraq. It was a clear expression of values and convictions. I mean, protests erupted in places where there had never been protests before, including in the little suburb of Seattle, Woodinville, Washington, where I was serving. Every Wednesday night, dozens of people gathered outside, often in the rain, on the corner of a busy intersection, to witness opposition to the administration's plans of attacking Iraq. And I was out there. I had hosted the planning meetings, wrote letters to the newspapers, and when the war went forward, as our leaders demonstrated disregard for opinions other than their own, we cried and mourned for what our beloved nation was doing. I got hate mail. I was told, my board president was told that I needed to be relieved immediately. It was an awful time. And since then, our wider society has evolved in both equitable ways and non-equitable ways, in beautiful ways and in ugly ways. And at the moment, it wasn't flimsy evidence that moved us into war. It appears it was just the decision of a single individual. And on this Memorial Day weekend, I want to lift up the importance of a core value of our country, and that is pluralism, religious freedom. There is no religion that is considered a state religion. But this is one of the core ideals of our country. And I find it scary and horrifying that to affirm pluralism puts you on one side of the polarizing that's occurring. But there's no two ways about it. Democracy affirms pluralism. And attacks on pluralism, such as insisting this is a Christian nation, these are attacks on democracy. And Unitarian Universalism, I've always believed, provides a spiritual foundation for a democratic society. And when I entered the ministry, I could not fathom that the very values that stem from the spiritual foundation for a democratic society will not only be questioned, but seemingly threatened. Given what happened in San Diego this past week, and how many Muslims find themselves targets of fearful and hateful comments and actions, and how many Jews find themselves targets of fearful and hateful comments and actions, it is important to acknowledge how pluralism is a core value for us. And this Memorial Day weekend is an apt time to remember this, despite what the Christian fundamentalists are saying. Now, one of the most meaningful moments I've had with you was on November 11th, when veterans in this congregation planned and participated in the Veterans Day service. This service honored, those who have served our nation's armed forces, and they also said, and this year it comes with a warning. a warning that the current administration's policies appear contrary to the values for which our veterans served. It was a fabulous service. And since then, our national life has become all the more surreal. Not only are we in this ill-conceived war, the president's federal police force have killed 2 Americans and detained many others. And now there's a fund to reward insurrectionists who attacked federal police officers on January 6th and affirm their loyalty to a president who couldn't admit to losing an election. I cannot imagine a veteran not asking themselves, is this what we were fighting for? What should we be fighting for now? This Memorial Day weekend, may we remember what is important to this nation and what it means for us to be Americans. And may we also remember those who have been among us, who no longer are with us. Today at 11:45, we will hold a ceremony to install the stones that we have consecrated today and bury the remains of those who have requested their remains be buried. You are welcome to join in. And prior to then, certainly be with the families and friends of those who are here with us today. It is so good to have a number of you here who are family and friends of those we have lost this past year. May you all have a meaningful Memorial Day weekend and have moments of resolve to call for a return to the values on which this country was founded. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen.
Visit us at uusg.org.